I don't care what it costs. Donovan Harlow's voice cracked into his phone, his words barely audible over the relentless screaming that had become the soundtrack of his life. Fly in from Switzerland, from Japan, from wherever the hell the best pediatric sleep specialists exist on this planet. The doctor on the other end was saying something about impossible cases and realistic expectations, but Donovan couldn't focus. 4 months. 4 months of his newborn quadruplets refusing to sleep for more than 20 minutes at a time. 4 months of watching his empire crumble while he stumbled through board meetings like a zombie. 4 months of seeing his wife Catherine retreat further into herself with each passing day. Sir, I understand your frustration, but we've exhausted every medical avenue. Then find unmapped avenues. Donovan slammed his fist against the mahogany desk in his home office, the impact sending family photos tumbling. The crying from upstairs seemed to intensify, as if responding to his outburst. I've built a technology empire worth $12 billion. I've solved problems that Nobel Prize winners called impossible. And you're telling me 4 7-pound humans have defeated modern medicine? Through his office window, dawn was breaking over the Harlow estate's sprawling grounds. Another sleepless night. Another day where he'd drag himself through meetings while his competitors circled like vultures, sensing weakness. The board was already whispering about his fitness to lead. Stock prices had dipped 3% since rumors started spreading about his personal difficulties. He ended the call and buried his face in his hands. The irony wasn't lost on him. He owned houses on 3 continents, had a staff of 37 people, and could afford literally anything money could buy. Yet he couldn't purchase 10 minutes of silence. The screaming upstairs reached a new crescendo, and Donovan felt something inside him snap. He'd tried everything. 3 different night nannies had quit. Dr. Pemberton, the country's leading pediatric neurologist, had run every test imaginable and found nothing wrong. Sleep consultants, aromatherapy experts, white noise machines worth more than most people's cars, nothing worked. His phone buzzed with another text from his assistant. Board meeting moved to 9 a.m. Hartford Industries interested in hostile takeover discussion. Need you sharp today. Sharp. He almost laughed. He hadn't been sharp in 4 months. He'd been a stumbling disaster, held together by caffeine and sheer stubborn will. Footsteps approached his office, and Catherine appeared in the doorway. His wife looked like a ghost of herself, hollow-eyed, her usually perfect blonde hair hanging limp around her shoulders. She'd lost 20 pounds since the birth, and not in a healthy way. The new nanny quit, she said flatly. Left a note saying she's never experienced anything like this in 15 years of childcare. She thinks she used the word cursed. Donovan stood up too quickly, his exhaustion making him dizzy. Cursed. They are babies, Catherine. Babies with some kind of sleep disorder that we haven't identified yet. Are they? Catherine's voice was hollow. Because I'm starting to wonder if something else is going on. 4 babies, Donovan. What are the odds that all 4 would have the exact same condition? The doctors said it's rare but not impossible with multiples. The doctors don't know anything. Catherine's composure finally cracked. We've spent $300,000 on specialists, and they are all just guessing. Meanwhile, our children scream 18 hours a day, and I can't. I can't do this anymore. The admission hung in the air like a threat. Donovan had seen that look before, in the eyes of executives about to resign, in the faces of investors about to pull funding. It was the look of someone who had reached their absolute limit. Cat, please. I'm going to my mother's, she said quietly. Just for a few days. I need to sleep, Donovan. I need to remember what it feels like to be human. Before he could respond, she was gone, leaving him alone with the sound of 4 babies who seemed determined to cry until the end of time. Donovan walked to the window and stared out at his perfectly manicured grounds. In the distance, he could see the small cottage where some of the live-in staff stayed. Smoke was rising from one of the chimneys, and for a moment, he envied whoever was inside. Probably sleeping peacefully, unburdened by the chaos that had consumed his life. Hey, my friend, hope you're doing well. Drop a comment and let me know how you're feeling about this story so far and where you are watching from. Some stories are too close to my heart to share on YouTube. I send those, along with little life lessons and surprises, to my email circle. If you'd like to be part of it, you can join with the link in the description. He thought about his own childhood, growing up middle class in suburban Ohio. His mother had raised 3 boys practically single-handedly while his father worked double shifts at the plant. She'd somehow managed to keep them all in line with nothing but love, determination, and what she called old-fashioned wisdom. He wished she were still alive to help him now. She would have known what to do. The crying upstairs suddenly stopped. Donovan froze, his hand halfway to his coffee cup. In 4 months, this had never happened. The silence was so complete, so unexpected, that it felt supernatural. He held his breath, waiting for it to resume, but seconds ticked by with nothing but blessed quiet. Then he heard something else, a voice, soft and melodic, drifting down from the nursery. Someone was singing, but it wasn't Catherine. She couldn't carry a tune to save her life. This voice was different, warm and rich, with an accent he couldn't quite place. Moving quietly, afraid to break whatever spell had been cast, Donovan climbed the stairs toward the nursery. The singing grew clearer as he approached, and he realized he'd never heard the melody before. It wasn't any lullaby from his own childhood or any of the hundreds Catherine had tried. This was something older, deeper, with notes that seemed to come from somewhere ancient and wise. The nursery door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, Donovan could see someone he'd barely noticed before. Lilia, one of the housekeeping staff. She'd been working for them for almost a year, but he'd never really looked at her, never really seen her as more than part of the invisible machinery that kept his household running. Now she was holding Mason, his most restless son, and the baby was completely still in her arms. His other 3 children, Liam, Sophia, and Melissa, were lying in their cribs, eyes closed, breathing deeply. For the first time in 4 months, all 4 of his children were asleep. Lilia's voice continued the strange, beautiful lullaby, and Donovan found himself leaning against the door frame, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, afraid to do anything that might break this impossible moment. The woman holding his son couldn't be more than 25, with dark skin and gentle hands that moved in some kind of rhythm as she sang. There was something in her posture, something in the way she held Mason, that spoke of deep knowledge and unshakable confidence. As he watched, she carefully placed Mason in his crib next to his siblings. The baby didn't stir. She stood there for a moment, hands moving in what looked like some kind of blessing over each crib, and then she turned toward the door. Their eyes met, and Donovan saw something in her gaze that stopped him cold. It wasn't surprise or embarrassment at being caught. It was something deeper, older. Recognition, maybe. As if she'd been waiting for this moment. "They are sleeping," she said quietly, her voice carrying the same warm notes as her lullaby. Donovan nodded, unable to form words. In that simple statement lay the thing that had eluded him for 4 months, the thing that all his money and power and resources couldn't achieve. His children were sleeping. And somehow, this woman he'd never really noticed, this maid who cleaned his house and remained invisible in his daily life, had accomplished what teams of experts couldn't. "How?" he whispered. Lilia studied his face for a long moment, and Donovan had the strange feeling she was seeing not just him, but something deeper. Something he'd forgotten about himself. "Sometimes," she said softly, "babies need more than medicine can give them. Sometimes they need to feel safe in a way that goes deeper than any crib or room or house." She moved past him toward the door, but he caught her arm gently. "Please," he said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and desperation. "Whatever you just did, can you teach me?" For a moment, something flickered across her face, surprise, maybe, or something else he couldn't identify. Then she nodded slowly. "Tomorrow night," she said. "I'll show you what my grandmother taught me." As she disappeared down the hallway, Donovan remained frozen in the nursery doorway, staring at his sleeping children and wondering if everything he thought he knew about his life was about to change. The silence stretched on, beautiful and terrifying in its completeness. And for the first time in 4 months, Donovan Harlow, the man who had conquered every challenge he'd ever faced, found himself completely unprepared for what was coming next. The silence lasted exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes. Donovan knew because he'd sat in the nursery the entire time, watching his children sleep like they were performing some kind of miracle. When Mason stirred at 3:47 a.m., the spell broke, and within minutes all 4 babies were screaming again as if they'd never stopped. But those 4 hours had changed everything. For the first time since the Quadruplets' birth, Donovan had experienced what his life used to feel like, the deep, restorative quiet of a home at peace. He'd forgotten that houses could feel calm instead of like war zones. Now, as he stumbled through his morning shower, he found himself thinking not about quarterly projections or the Hartford Industries meeting, but about Lilia's hands moving over his children's cribs. There had been something ritualistic about it, something that spoke of traditions passed down through generations rather than learned in medical schools. His phone buzzed with another crisis. His assistant's text was blunt. "Hartford called emergency board meeting. 10 a.m. They know about the sleepless nights. Using it to question your leadership capacity. Donovan stared at the message, fury building in his chest. Someone had been talking. Someone inside his own house had leaked information about his family's struggles to his biggest corporate rival. The question was who? Downstairs, the household staff moved through their morning routines with practiced efficiency. Chloe, the head housekeeper, was coordinating breakfast preparations. James, the butler, was reviewing the day's schedule. But Donovan found himself scanning their faces differently now, wondering which one had betrayed him. He spotted Lilia in the kitchen, quietly preparing what looked like some kind of herbal tea. She wore the same simple gray uniform as the other housekeeping staff, but something about her presence seemed different now. More substantial. Like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. "Lilia," he called softly. She looked up, and again he felt that strange recognition in her eyes, as if she knew things about him that he'd never told anyone. "Mr. Harlow, how are the babies this morning?" "Back to their usual routine," he said with a grimace. "But those 4 hours. I need to understand what you did." Chloe glanced over from across the kitchen, her expression carefully neutral, but Donovan caught something in her look. Disapproval? Concern? It was gone too quickly to identify. "My grandmother was a midwife in Jamaica," Lilia said, ignoring Chloe's attention. "She delivered over 300 babies in her lifetime. She used to say that some children come into the world carrying burdens that aren't theirs. They cry because they feel everything their parents carry, the fear, the stress, the disconnection from what matters." Donovan felt something twist in his stomach. "You're saying they're crying because of me?" "I'm saying babies are more sensitive than most people realize. They feel the energy around them. When everyone in a house is anxious and exhausted, they absorb that anxiety." "That's not medical science," Chloe interjected from across the kitchen. "That's just superstition." Lilia's expression didn't change, but Donovan noticed her hands still for just a moment. "Maybe. But it works." There was something in the exchange that made Donovan uneasy. A tension between the two women that suggested history he wasn't aware of. Chloe had been with the family for 8 years, had been instrumental in helping Catherine manage the household's expansion as his wealth grew. She'd always been fiercely protective of the family's privacy and reputation. "Chloe," he said carefully, "who else knows about the baby's sleep issues?" "Only the household staff, sir. And we're all very discreet." But there was something in her tone that made him wonder. Chloe had always been ambitious, had often hinted that she could manage much larger estates if given the opportunity. And she had access to his schedule, his private conversations, his family's most vulnerable moments. His phone rang. "Catherine. Don, I'm staying at Mother's for the rest of the week," she said without preamble. "I got 6 hours of sleep last night. 6 actual consecutive hours. I'd forgotten what that felt like." "The babies slept for 4 hours," he said, watching Lilia's reaction. "One of the staff managed to calm them." "Which specialist? How much did it cost?" "It wasn't a specialist. It was Lilia, from housekeeping." Silence stretched across the line. When Catherine spoke again, her voice was sharp. "The maid. Don, you're not seriously considering trusting our children's welfare to the housekeeping staff. She got them to sleep, Cat. That's more than anyone else has accomplished. It was probably a coincidence. Or maybe they were just exhausted from crying all day. Don't read more into this then. I watched her do it. There was something deliberate about her approach, something that actually worked." Another pause. "I want you to be very careful, Donovan. We don't really know these people. We don't know their backgrounds, their motivations. And right now, with everything we're going through, we can't afford to let our desperation cloud our judgment." The call ended, leaving Donovan with an uncomfortable realization. His wife didn't trust Lilia. Chloe seemed threatened by her. And yet this woman, who'd been nearly invisible in his house for almost a year, was the only person who'd been able to help his children. "Mr. Harlow." Lilia's voice was gentle. "If you want to learn what my grandmother taught me, I'll need to share some things that might be difficult to hear." He studied her face, trying to read the depths behind her calm expression. "What kind of things?" "Things about what children need that money can't provide. Things about how wealth can sometimes create its own kind of poverty." The words hit him harder than they should have. Growing up, his mother had worked 2 jobs to keep their family afloat, but their house had always felt warm, connected. His children lived in a mansion with every possible comfort, yet they seemed more distressed than he'd ever been as a child sharing a bedroom with his brothers. My mother raised 3 boys on $28,000 a year, he said quietly. We shared clothes, ate generic cereal, and considered dinner at McDonald's a special occasion. But we slept fine. Lilia nodded. Children need to feel safe, but not the kind of safety that money provides. They need to feel connected to something larger than themselves. They need to feel their parents' peace, not their parents' success. Before Donovan could respond, James appeared in the kitchen doorway. Sir, your car is ready for the board meeting. And there's been a development. Hartford Industries has made a formal offer to buy your controlling shares. They are claiming it's in the company's best interest, given recent instabilities in leadership. The bottom dropped out of Donovan's stomach. This was exactly what he'd feared. His competitors weren't just circling, they were moving in for the kill. How did they know about the leadership concerns? He asked, his voice deadly quiet. James shifted uncomfortably. I'm not sure, sir. Perhaps they were rumors. They weren't rumors, James. There were facts. Private facts about my family's situation that someone shared with our competitors. The kitchen fell silent. Chloe continued cleaning breakfast dishes, but her movements had become mechanical. Lilia stood perfectly still, watching the interaction with those perceptive eyes. James looked genuinely confused, but Donovan had learned not to trust appearances in business or, apparently, in his own home. I want a full review of all phone records, internet usage, and personal communications from this household, he said. Someone here has been talking to Hartford, and I'm going to find out who. As he turned to leave, Lilia's voice stopped him. Mr. Harlow, the thing about betrayal is that it usually comes from where we least expect it. But it also reveals what we value most. Their eyes met, and Donovan felt that strange recognition again. As if she understood something about his situation that went deeper than corporate espionage or household loyalty. Tonight, she said, if you want to learn how to help your children sleep, meet me in the nursery at midnight. But be prepared to hear truths you might not want to face. As Donovan left for what could be the most important board meeting of his career, he found himself thinking not about hostile takeovers or stock prices, but about a young woman who saw through his wealth to something he'd forgotten existed. And for the first time since his children's birth, he wondered if the real crisis in his life wasn't the one threatening his empire, but the one threatening his soul. The baby's cries followed him to his car, but now they sounded different. Not like chaos, but like a question he hadn't yet learned how to answer. The boardroom felt like a courtroom, and Donovan knew he was being tried for crimes he couldn't defend against. 12 faces stared at him across the polished conference table, men and women who'd made fortunes following his vision, who'd trusted his leadership for 8 years of unprecedented growth. Now they looked at him like he was a stranger, their expressions ranging from disappointment to barely concealed hostility. Let me understand this correctly, said Richard Hartford, his silver hair perfectly styled despite flying in from Boston that morning. You've missed or shortened 14 board meetings in the past 4 months. Your response time to critical decisions has increased by an average of 4 to 7 hours. And according to our sources, you've been unable to maintain basic household stability. Donovan's hands clenched under the table. My family situation is temporary. Temporary. Hartford's smile was predatory. Your own wife has moved out. Your household staff is discussing your difficulties openly enough that details have reached my organization. This isn't temporary, Donovan. This is a man who's lost control of his personal life attempting to maintain control of a $12 billion corporation. Richard, you're out of line, said Patricia Morse, one of Donovan's oldest board allies. But her voice lacked its usual conviction. Am I? Let's discuss the Yamamoto deal. 3 weeks ago, Donovan fell asleep during a video conference with our largest potential Japanese partner. They walked away from a $400 million contract because our CEO couldn't stay awake for a business meeting. Offer to buy your controlling shares. They are claiming it's in the company's best interest, given recent instabilities in leadership. The bottom dropped out of Donovan's stomach. This was exactly what he'd feared. His competitors weren't just circling, they were moving in for the kill. How did they know about the leadership concerns? He asked, his voice deadly quiet. James shifted uncomfortably. I'm not sure, sir. Perhaps they were rumors. They weren't rumors, James. There were facts. Private facts about my family's situation that someone shared with our competitors. The kitchen fell silent. Chloe continued cleaning breakfast dishes, but her movements had become mechanical. Lilia stood perfectly still, watching the interaction with those perceptive eyes. James looked genuinely confused, But Donovan had learned not to trust appearances in business or, apparently, in his own home. I want a full review of all phone records, internet usage, and personal communications from this household, he said. Someone here has been talking to Hartford, and I'm going to find out who. As he turned to leave, Lilia's voice stopped him. Mr. Harlow? The thing about betrayal is that it usually comes from where we least expect it. But it also reveals what we value most. Their eyes met, and Donovan felt that strange recognition again. As if she understood something about his situation that went deeper than corporate espionage or household loyalty. Tonight, she said, if you want to learn how to help your children sleep, meet me in the nursery at midnight. But be prepared to hear truths you might not want to face. As Donovan left for what could be the most important board meeting of his career, he found himself thinking not about hostile takeovers or stock prices, but about a young woman who saw through his wealth to something he'd forgotten existed. And for the first time since his children's birth, he wondered if the real crisis in his life wasn't the one threatening his empire, but the one threatening his soul. The baby's cries followed him to his car, but now they sounded different. Not like chaos, but like a question he hadn't yet learned how to answer. The boardroom felt like a courtroom, and Donovan knew he was being tried for crimes he couldn't defend against. 12 faces stared at him across the polished conference table, men and women who'd made fortunes following his vision, who'd trusted his leadership for 8 years of unprecedented growth. Now they looked at him like he was a stranger, their expressions ranging from disappointment to barely concealed hostility. Let me understand this correctly, said Richard Hartford, his silver hair perfectly styled despite flying in from Boston that morning. You've missed or shortened 14 board meetings in the past 4 months. Your response time to critical decisions has increased by an average of 4 to 7 hours. And according to our sources, you've been unable to maintain basic household stability. Donovan's hands clenched under the table. My family situation is temporary. Temporary? Hartford's smile was predatory. Your own wife has moved out. Your household staff is discussing your difficulties openly enough that details have reached my organization. This isn't temporary, Donovan. This is a man who's lost control of his personal life attempting to maintain control of a $12 billion corporation. Richard, you're out of line, said Patricia Morse, one of Donovan's oldest board allies. But her voice lacked its usual conviction. Am I? Let's discuss the Yamamoto deal. 3 weeks ago, Donovan fell asleep during a video conference with our largest potential Japanese partner. They walked away from a $400 million contract because our CEO couldn't stay awake for a business meeting. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The offer stands. Join me at the hospital. Your children need what I can teach you, but first you need to understand what you've been carrying. Lilia. Somehow, even from a hospital bed, she was reaching out to help him. Chloe, get Mrs. Camden from next door to help with the babies. I'm going to the hospital. Sir, perhaps you should wait for Mrs. Harlow to return. My wife leaked our private medical information to Hartford Industries, he said flatly. She orchestrated my removal from my own company. Mrs. Harlow isn't coming back. The admission hung in the air like a death sentence. His marriage was over. His company was gone. His children were suffering beyond anything medicine could explain. Everything he'd built, everything he'd believed about his life, had crumbled in a single morning. But as he looked at his screaming children, he realized that losing everything might be exactly what he needed to find what actually mattered. The drive to the hospital felt like crossing into a different world. Behind him lay the ruins of his old life, the corporate empire, the marriage built on status rather than connection, the household that functioned like a business rather than a home. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also something he hadn't felt in years. The possibility that a poor black maid who cleaned his house might understand something about life that all his wealth and success had never taught him. His children needed more than money could provide. And for the first time since their birth, Donovan was ready to learn what that something was. The General Hospital's emergency room smelled like industrial disinfectant and desperation. Donovan found Lilia in a small curtained bay, connected to monitors that beeped steadily while she stared at the ceiling with an expression he couldn't read. You came, she said softly, turning her head toward him. Her voice was weaker than before, but her eyes held the same depth that had unsettled him from the beginning. The babies won't stop crying, he said, pulling a plastic chair closer to her bed. Whatever you did last night, they need it again. A sad smile crossed her face. It's not something I did to them, Mr. Harlow. It's something I took from them. And it's killing me. What do you mean? Lilia was quiet for a long moment, studying his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. My grandmother called it burden lifting. Some children are born carrying things that don't belong to them, generational pain, family trauma, spiritual weight that gets passed down like DNA. The crying isn't just crying. It's release. Donovan felt a chill run down his spine. That's not possible. Your great-grandfather, she said quietly. What do you know about him? The question caught him off guard. He built the family's first business. A small manufacturing company in Ohio. Why? How did he build it? Hard work. Determination. The American dream. But even as he said it, something nagged at the back of his mind. Stories his grandmother had whispered when she thought the children weren't listening. Stories about deals made in desperation, about success that came at a price. My grandmother delivered babies for 70 years, Lilia continued. She learned to recognize the signs when children were born carrying ancestral debt. Your children aren't sick, Mr. Harlow. They are trying to release something that's been trapped in your family line for generations. That's, he wanted to say impossible, but the word died in his throat. Because looking at her lying in that hospital bed, clearly drained from whatever had happened in the nursery, he couldn't dismiss what he'd witnessed. You're saying my family is cursed. I'm saying that sometimes wealth built on the wrong foundation carries a cost that gets passed down until someone strong enough pays it. Before Donovan could respond, his phone buzzed. Catherine's number. Don, I heard about the board meeting. Her voice was different, not the defeated tone of the exhausted wife, but something sharper. I'm sorry it had to happen this way. Had to happen. He stepped away from Lilia's bed, lowering his voice. Catherine, did you give Hartford our medical records? Silence stretched across the line. When she spoke again, all pretense was gone. Richard offered me a very generous settlement. Full custody, the Malibu house, and enough money to ensure the children get the specialized care they need. The betrayal hit him like a physical blow. You sold me out to Hartford. I saved our family from your deteriorating mental state. You've become obsessed with these ridiculous theories about curses and magic. You're listening to the housekeeping staff instead of medical professionals. Richard was right. You're not fit to lead a corporation. Our children, Catherine. What about our children? We'll be better off with a stable parent who can afford the best medical care money can provide. The divorce papers are being filed this afternoon. Don't contest it, Don. You'll lose everything anyway. The line went dead, leaving Donovan staring at his phone in the sterile hospital lighting. Everything was crumbling faster than he could process. His company, his marriage, his entire identity as a successful man who controlled his world. She's afraid. Lilia's voice was gentle behind him. He turned back to her, feeling more lost than he'd ever felt in his life. Of what? Of the truth. Of what it means to really heal your family instead of just managing symptoms. Catherine comes from old money, doesn't she? Her family's wealth goes back generations. Donovan nodded. Her great-great-grandfather was one of the original railroad barons. Then she knows, somewhere deep down, that some family fortunes carry dark histories. She'd rather keep the children medicated and manageable than face what might need to be released. And you think you can fix it? With lullabies and whatever you call it. Lilia shifted in the hospital bed, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked vulnerable. Young. I think I can try. But it requires trust, and it requires sacrifice. And it might require you to learn things about your family that will change how you see everything. Her phone buzzed with a text, and when she read it, her face went pale. What is it? Chloe. She says the baby's condition is getting worse. They are not just crying now, they are developing fevers, refusing to eat. She's calling 911. Donovan felt panic rise in his chest. I have to get back. Wait. Lilia struggled to sit up, ignoring the monitor's protests. Take me with you. You just collapsed. You need medical attention. Your children need attention that no doctor here can provide. And if we don't help them soon, the burden they are carrying will. She stopped, looking away. Will what? We'll kill them. Or break them in ways that can't be fixed. The words hung between them like a death sentence. Donovan found himself studying this woman who'd somehow become central to his family's survival. She was beautiful, he realized for the first time. Not in the polished, maintained way Catherine was beautiful, but in something deeper. There was strength in her face, wisdom in her eyes that seemed impossible for her age. Who are you really? He asked quietly. Someone who learned things other people forgot. Someone whose grandmother made her promise to help when she recognized the signs. She met his eyes directly. Someone who's starting to care more about your family than is probably wise. The admission created an electric tension between them. Donovan felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine attraction based on connection rather than convenience. This woman had seen him at his worst, had witnessed his complete failure to control his world, and was still offering to help. Lilia. He started, but she shook her head. Don't. Not now. Not when everything is falling apart. But know that what's happening between us is part of this too. Part of what needs to be healed. Her discharge took 30 minutes of arguing with doctors who wanted to keep her for observation. During that time, Donovan received 4 more texts from Chloe describing his children's deteriorating condition, 2 calls from reporters who'd somehow learned about his board removal, and 1 message from Hartford's lawyers demanding immediate surrender of all corporate passwords and access codes. But sitting in that hospital room, watching Lilia sign discharge papers against medical advice, he felt something unexpected: clarity. For the first time in months, maybe years, he knew exactly what mattered most. There's something I need to tell you, Lilia said as they walked toward his car. About Chloe. About why she's really messaging so frequently. What do you mean? She's not just trying to help with the babies. She's been documenting everything, your interactions with me, the baby's responses, everything we've discussed about family history and spiritual healing. Donovan stopped walking. For who? Catherine. Hartford. Maybe both. Chloe's been promised a position managing Hartford's estate in Connecticut. She's been reporting on your family's private moments for weeks. The betrayal felt like another blow, but somehow less shocking than Catherine's. Chloe had always been ambitious, had always seemed more invested in the family's status than their welfare. Then why is she texting about the babies now? Lilia's expression darkened. Because something's gone wrong. Something she can't control or explain to her new employers. The babies aren't just crying anymore, are they? There's something else happening. As if summoned by her words, Donovan's phone rang. Chloe, her voice frantic. Mr. Harlow, please come home immediately. The babies, they've stopped crying, but they won't wake up. They are breathing, but they are completely unresponsive. The paramedics are here, but they don't understand what's happening. Nothing I've seen in 8 years of working for families has prepared me for this. Donovan looked at Lilia, who was already moving toward his car. How did you know? Because burden lifting isn't just about taking away pain, she said grimly. If it's interrupted, if the process is broken before it's complete, the children can slip too far inward. They retreat so deep into themselves that they might not find their way back. Are you saying my children could? I'm saying we need to get home now. And that what happens next will determine whether your family has a future or whether the weight your ancestors carried finally destroys everything you love. As they drove through traffic that seemed deliberately slow, Donovan realized that losing his company and his marriage might have been just the beginning. The real battle, for his children's lives, for his family's soul, for a future he was only starting to understand he wanted, was about to begin. And the woman beside him, this maid who'd somehow become his children's only hope, was the only ally he had left in a war he didn't yet know how to fight. The ambulances were pulling away as Donovan and Lilia arrived at the estate. Through the nursery windows, he could see emergency lights still flashing, but the silence was worse than the crying had ever been. No sound meant his children weren't responding to anything. Dr. Pemberton met them at the front door, his usually composed demeanor cracked with confusion. Donovan, I've never seen anything like this. All 4 children are in a catatonic state. Brain activity shows they are not unconscious, but they are completely unresponsive to external stimuli. It's as if they've retreated completely inward. Where are they taking them? Donovan's voice was hoarse. Children's hospital. But I need to be honest with you. We don't have protocols for this. Medically, there's nothing wrong with them. Their vitals are stable, but they are simply not present. Lilia pushed past them both, heading for the stairs. They are still here. We can still reach them. Miss, Dr. Pemberton called after her. The children have been transported. No, she said, stopping on the staircase. Not all of them. Donovan felt ice in his veins. What do you mean not all of them? Lilia's face was grim. Melissa. She's still in the nursery. They couldn't move her. Dr. Pemberton's expression shifted to something close to fear. That's impossible. I supervised the transport myself. All 4 children. Look again, Lilia said quietly. They followed her upstairs to the nursery, where Chloe stood frozen in the doorway. Inside, Melissa lay in her crib exactly as they'd left her, breathing but motionless, her eyes open but seeing nothing. "I don't understand," Dr. Pemberton whispered. The paramedics confirmed 4 children in the ambulance. "I watched them load." "You watched them load 3 children and something else," Lilia said. "Something that looked like Melissa but wasn't." The words made no sense, but looking at his daughter's empty eyes, Donovan felt reality shifting around him. "Lilia, what the hell is happening to my family?" She moved to Melissa's crib, her hands hovering over the child without touching. The burden lifting went wrong. "When it was interrupted, when I collapsed, the process split. 3 of your children went too deep inward, and 1." She paused, her face pale. "1 stayed to guard the threshold." "That's medically impossible," Dr. Pemberton said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Dr. Pemberton," Lilia turned to face him directly. "What do you know about the Harlow family history? About how their wealth was really built?" The question hit like a physical blow. Dr. Pemberton's face went ashen, and he took a step backward. "I don't. I'm not sure what you're asking." "Yes, you do." Lilia's voice carried absolute certainty. "Because your great-grandfather was there. He was the one who documented everything." Donovan felt the ground shifting beneath him. "Dr. Pemberton, what is she talking about?" The doctor's hands were shaking now. "This is ridiculous. I think grief and stress are causing you to embrace fantastical explanations." Dr. Edmund Pemberton, Lilia continued relentlessly. Personal physician to Thomas Harlow in 1897. The man who certified the deaths that weren't really deaths. The man who helped cover up what really happened to build the Harlow fortune. "Stop," Dr. Pemberton whispered. But Lilia wasn't stopping. Thomas Harlow didn't build his wealth through hard work and determination. He built it through a deal with something that required payment in blood. Children's blood. And when he couldn't pay, when the debt came due, your great-grandfather helped him fake the deaths of 3 children and ship them to work camps in the Caribbean. Donovan's world tilted sideways. "That's impossible. That's insane." "Is it?" Lilia pulled her phone from her pocket, showing him a photograph that made his blood freeze. It was an old daguerreotype, clearly from the late 1800s, showing a man who looked exactly like him standing next to a woman holding a baby. Behind them stood another man in a physician's coat who bore an unmistakable resemblance to Dr. Pemberton. "Where did you get this?" "From my great-great-grandmother's belongings. The midwife who delivered those children. The woman who tried to save them and was murdered for her efforts." Dr. Pemberton was backing toward the door. "This is madness. I'm calling security." "You're not calling anyone," Donovan said, his voice deadly quiet. "Because you've known. You've known what was wrong with my children from the beginning, and you've been deliberately keeping them sick." "That's not. I would never." "The medications you prescribed," Lilia said. "They weren't to help them sleep. They were to keep them from releasing the burden. To keep the debt trapped in their bloodline." Donovan felt pieces clicking together with horrifying clarity. Dr. Pemberton hadn't been trying to help. He'd been managing a family obligation passed down through generations. Keeping the Harlow children medicated and compliant, ensuring the spiritual debt never got fully paid. "My children," he whispered. "How long have you been poisoning my children?" "I wasn't poisoning them." Dr. Pemberton's composure finally cracked. "I was protecting them. Do you have any idea what happens when a debt like this comes due? When the payment is finally collected? It doesn't just affect your family. It affects everyone connected to the original sin. My family, the families of everyone who helped cover it up. So you've been keeping my children in spiritual prison to protect yourself. I've been keeping your children alive. The alternative isn't release, it's obliteration. Complete destruction of your family line." Lilia moved closer to Melissa's crib. "That might have been true once, but the debt can be transferred. The burden can be carried by someone who chooses it willingly." "Someone like you," Donovan said, understanding flooding through him. She nodded, not looking at him. "My family has been connected to yours for 5 generations. My great-great-grandmother died trying to save those children. Her daughter worked as a midwife, helping other families break similar curses. The knowledge, the ability, it gets passed down. And the cost?" For the first time since he'd met her, Lilia looked truly afraid. The person who takes on the burden, they carry it until they die. They live with the weight of every sin, every injustice, every spiritual debt that the family accumulated. It's a life of constant pain, but it allows the children to be free. The magnitude of what she was offering hit him like an avalanche. This woman, this beautiful, strong woman who'd somehow become central to everything important in his life, was volunteering to sacrifice herself for his children. No, he said firmly. There has to be another way. There isn't. Then we find one. Together. She turned to look at him, and in her eyes he saw something that took his breath away. Love. Not the calculated affection of his marriage to Catherine, not the social connection he'd mistaken for romance. Real love, born from seeing him at his absolute worst and choosing to help anyway. Donovan, she said softly, there's something else you need to know. The way she said it sent dread through his system. What? I didn't just happen to work for your family. I didn't just stumble into this job. What are you saying? I've been here for a year, watching, waiting, preparing for this moment. I knew your children would be born carrying the debt. I knew they would need help that only my family could provide. The words felt like a physical blow. You've been lying to me. This whole time, everything between us. Everything between us is real, she said desperately. But I did come here with a purpose. I came here to fulfill a promise my grandmother made to a dying woman. To break a cycle that's destroyed too many children. Donovan felt the last of his trust crumbling. First Catherine, then Chloe, then Dr. Pemberton, and now Lilia. Everyone in his life had been playing a role, pursuing an agenda, manipulating him for their own purposes. Get out, he said quietly. Donovan, please. Get out. His voice echoed through the nursery, and Melissa stirred for the first time in hours, responding to his anguish. Lilia backed toward the door, tears streaming down her face. I love you. What's between us is real, even if how we met wasn't. And I'm not leaving, not when your children need. My children need protection from people who use them to settle old debts. From people who lie about their intentions. From people like you. She stopped in the doorway, her face breaking with grief. The transfer ritual has to happen tonight. Before dawn. If it doesn't, all 4 children will be lost forever. Not just sick, not just difficult, gone. The debt will consume them completely. Find another way. There isn't another way. And you know it. After she left, Donovan stood alone in the nursery with his catatonic daughter, surrounded by the wreckage of everything he'd believed about his life. His company was gone. His marriage was destroyed. His trust had been shattered by everyone he'd relied on. And now the one person who'd offered genuine help had revealed herself to be just another manipulator. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The children at the hospital are fading. You have 6 hours to decide. Let Lilia save them, or lose them forever. Choose wisely. A friend. Donovan looked down at Melissa, his youngest daughter, lying motionless in her crib. For the first time since this nightmare began, he was completely, utterly alone. No allies, no advisors, no one to turn to except a woman who'd admitted to deceiving him from the moment they met. And the terrible truth was that despite everything, despite the lies and manipulation and hidden agendas, he still believed Lilia was his children's only hope. The question was whether he could trust her with their lives when she'd already proven she couldn't be trusted with his heart. Outside, dawn was still hours away. Time enough to make a choice that would determine whether his family had any future at all. But first, he needed to understand exactly what kind of debt his ancestors had created, and what it would really cost to set his children free. Donovan spent the next 2 hours in his father's study, a room he'd avoided since the funeral 5 years ago. Hidden behind false panels and locked drawers, he found what Dr. Pemberton and Lilia both knew existed: the real history of his family's wealth. The documents were horrifying in their clinical detail. Business ledgers that listed children alongside cotton and tobacco as transported goods. Medical records signed by Dr. Edmund Pemberton documenting deaths that never occurred. And at the center of it all, a contract signed in his great-great-grandfather's blood, promising the lives of every 7th generation in exchange for unprecedented business success. His children were the 7th generation. The phone call from Children's Hospital came at 3 a.m. Mr. Harlow, you need to get here immediately. Dr. Betty Camden's voice was strained. Your children, their condition has deteriorated rapidly. We're seeing organ failure that we can't explain. Heart rates dropping, brain activity diminishing. We may need to discuss end-of-life decisions. The drive to the hospital felt like descending into hell. Lilia was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against her old Honda Civic with tears streaming down her face. They are dying, she said without preamble. I can feel it. The debt is collecting itself. Don't, Donovan said, walking past her toward the hospital entrance. You've lied about everything else. Don't pretend you actually care now. She caught his arm. I've never lied about caring. I lied about how I got the job, about why I was there, but never about how I feel about you or your children. Your feelings don't matter anymore. But even as he said it, looking at her tear-stained face, feeling the warmth of her hand on his arm, he knew it wasn't true. Despite everything, despite the deception and manipulation, what he felt for her was stronger than anything he'd ever experienced with Catherine. Inside the pediatric ICU, his 3 children lay connected to machines that tracked their slide toward death. Mason's heart rate had dropped to dangerous levels. Liam's brain activity showed almost no response to stimuli. Sophia's breathing was so shallow the ventilator was doing most of the work. Mr. Harlow, Dr. Camden approached with the careful manner doctors used when delivering impossible news. I need to be honest with you. Medically, we don't understand what's happening. All their organs are simply shutting down. There's no disease, no poisoning, no explanation we can identify. How long do they have? Hours. Maybe less. Donovan sank into a chair beside Mason's bed, staring at his son's pale face. At 3 months old, Mason had never really been awake for more than a few minutes at a time. Donovan realized with crushing guilt that he'd never actually gotten to know any of his children. They'd been problems to solve, challenges to manage, but not people to love. There's something else, Dr. Camden continued. Your wife arrived an hour ago with Hartford Industries' legal team. They are claiming your children are in state custody pending the resolution of your mental health evaluation. Apparently, Mrs. Harlow has filed papers declaring you an unfit parent. The words hit like physical blows. They can't do that. They can if they have documentation of erratic behavior, financial instability, and association with. She glanced at Lilia, who had followed them inside, non-medical treatment providers. Catherine appeared in the ICU doorway, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits. She looked perfectly composed, her blonde hair styled, her makeup flawless despite the early hour. Behind her stood Richard Hartford, wearing the expression of a man who'd won a war. Donovan, Catherine's voice carried artificial sympathy. I'm sorry it's come to this, but you're clearly not capable of making rational decisions about our children's care. Our children are dying, and you're worried about custody. Our children are dying because you've been taking medical advice from housekeeping staff instead of qualified physicians. Her eyes flicked to Lilia with undisguised contempt. This person has filled your head with nonsense about curses and family debts. You're having a mental breakdown, and our children are paying the price. Hartford stepped forward. Mr. Harlow, we've arranged for the finest specialists in the country to examine your children. Real doctors, not. He gestured dismissively at Lilia. Whatever this is. What this is, Lilia said quietly, is the only person who understands what's really killing them. Understanding requires education and credentials, Catherine snapped. Not folk tales and superstition. Catherine, Donovan's voice was deadly quiet. You know the family history. Your mother made sure you knew before we got married. You know this isn't medical. For just a moment, Catherine's perfect composure cracked. That's ancient history. Rumors and stories that don't affect modern life. Then why did you insist we wait 3 years before having children? Why did you make me meet with your family's genealogist? Why did you track our bloodlines back 5 generations before agreeing to get pregnant? The questions hung in the air like accusations. Hartford was looking between them with growing confusion, clearly unaware of the deeper currents in play. Catherine. Hartford's voice carried warning. What is he talking about? Before Catherine could answer, alarms started going off around Mason's bed. His heart rate was plummeting. Code Blue, Pediatric ICU, the PA system announced. Code Blue, Pediatric ICU. Medical staff flooded the room, pushing everyone aside as they worked to stabilize a 3-month-old baby whose body was simply giving up. Donovan watched his son's face, so pale it was almost translucent, and felt something break inside his chest. Please, he whispered to no one in particular. Please don't take him. There's still time, Lilia said beside him. The ritual can still work. But not here. Not with all these machines and medical interventions. The spiritual transfer needs to happen in a place of power, a place connected to the original debt. You're out of your mind, Catherine said. Our son is dying, and you want to take him away from medical care. Your son is dying because medical care can't touch what's killing him, Lilia replied. Every minute he stays connected to those machines, the debt grows stronger. It feeds on the desperation, the fear, the attempt to control what can't be controlled. The medical team managed to stabilize Mason's heart rate, but Dr. Camden's expression was grim. This is temporary. His body is shutting down systematically. We're fighting symptoms, not causes. Hartford pulled Catherine aside, and Donovan could hear fragments of their urgent conversation. Liability issues. Need documented medical failure. Transfer custody before. They were planning something. Some legal maneuver that would remove his children from his control permanently, probably while blaming their deaths on his irrational decision to trust Lilia. "Way?" Donovan asked quietly. Lilia looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. "What? Where would we need to take them?" "For the ritual. The original site. Where your great-great-grandfather made the deal. Where the first children were taken." "I don't know where that is." "I do." She pulled out an old leather journal. "My great-great-grandmother documented everything. The location, the ritual requirements, the cost." Donovan stared at the journal, knowing that opening it would be stepping across a line he could never uncross. Accepting that his rational, scientific worldview was wrong. Accepting that some debts couldn't be paid with money or power or modern medicine. "The cost," he said. "Tell me exactly what it means." Lilia's face went pale. "The person who accepts the burden carries it until their death. They live with constant pain, physical, emotional, spiritual. They feel every injustice, every act of cruelty, every moment of suffering that the original debt created. It's like having your soul slowly consumed by acid. And you're willing to do that? For children who aren't even yours. For children who deserve better than the sins of their ancestors. For you, because..." She stopped, looking away. "Because what?" "Because I fell in love with a man who would sacrifice everything for his family. Even if he can't forgive me for how we met." The admission hung between them like a bridge across an impossible gap. Donovan felt his anger and betrayal warring with something deeper, something that recognized truth when he heard it. Behind them, Catherine and Hartford were still planning. The medical team was fighting a losing battle against Mason's failing systems. His other children lay unconscious, their lives slipping away minute by minute. All options led to disaster. Medical treatment was failing. Legal maneuvers would only delay the inevitable while lawyers profited from his family's destruction. The rational world he built his life around had no answers for what was destroying his children. "If we try this," he said quietly, "and you're wrong, my children die." "If we don't try this," Lilia replied, "your children die anyway. But if I'm right, they live. Free from the debt, free from the burden, free to be children instead of paying for crimes they didn't commit." Donovan looked at his dying son, then at the woman who'd offered to sacrifice her life for his family's freedom. The choice should have been impossible. Trust the lying stranger who'd manipulated her way into his life, or trust the medical establishment that had already admitted defeat. But looking at Lilia's face, seeing the pain she was already carrying just from touching his family's burden, he realized the choice was actually simple. Love, real love, the kind that sacrificed everything for others, was the only force powerful enough to break a curse built on selfishness and cruelty. "What do we need to do?" he asked. Before Lilia could answer, Catherine's voice cut across the room like a blade. "Security. This woman is trying to kidnap dying children. Stop them." The war for his family's soul was about to become very real and very violent. And Donovan still had no idea if love would be enough to win it. Hospital security arrived within minutes, 2 guards who looked uncomfortable confronting a grieving father in a pediatric ICU. Behind them came Hartford's lawyers, armed with injunctions and court orders that would have taken hours to obtain through normal channels. Unless they'd been prepared in advance. "Catherine," Donovan said, realization cutting through him like ice. "How long have you been planning this?" His wife's perfect composure finally cracked completely. "Since the first doctor's visit. Since I realized what we were dealing with. Richard offered me a way out, for all of us. A way out that involves our children dying in legal custody while you profit from their deaths." Hartford stepped forward, his silver hair gleaming under the harsh hospital lights. "Mr. Harlow, your children are receiving the best medical care available. What you're proposing, removing dying infants from life support to participate in some primitive ritual, is nothing short of child endangerment." "What I'm proposing," Donovan said, his voice carrying an authority he'd forgotten he possessed, "is saving my children's lives using knowledge that your family has been trying to suppress for 5 generations. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Hartford's carefully controlled expression shifted slightly. I don't know what you're talking about. But Lilia was studying Hartford's face with an intensity that made Donovan's blood run cold. Yes, you do, she said quietly. Because Hartford Industries wasn't built on railroad money. It was built on the same kind of deal Thomas Harlow made. The same debt structure. The same payment schedule. Hartford's lawyers exchanged glances, clearly confused by the direction the conversation had taken. But Hartford himself went pale. You're insane. Am I? Then why did you wait until exactly this moment to make your move? Why did you spend months documenting Donovan's every weakness instead of just buying him out? Why does your takeover depend specifically on his children being declared wards of the state? The pieces clicked together with devastating clarity. You need my children, Donovan whispered. For your own family's debt. Hartford's mask finally slipped completely. 7 children from 7 bloodlines, offered in the 7th generation. That was the original contract. Your ancestor and mine made the deal together, Donovan. Thomas Harlow and Edmund Hartford, 1897. The payment comes due for both families simultaneously. Catherine stepped backward, horror dawning on her face. Richard, you said you were helping us. You said the custody arrangement was temporary. The custody arrangement ensures the children die in state care, which legally transfers the debt obligation to the government. Clean hands for both families. Your children pay the price that should have been paid a century ago. You bastard, Donovan snarled, lunging forward. Security moved to restrain him, but Lilia stepped between them, and something extraordinary happened. The guards stopped moving. Not reluctantly, not slowly, they simply froze in place, their eyes glazing over as if they'd suddenly forgotten why they were there. What the hell? Hartford started. The burden I carry isn't just your family's debt, Lilia said, her voice resonating with power that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her throat. It's the accumulated spiritual weight of every injustice, every betrayal, every act of greed that built your fortunes. And right now, that gives me certain authorities. The hospital equipment around them began to respond strangely. Heart monitors showed steady rhythms for the first time in hours. Breathing machines cycled more smoothly. The harsh fluorescent lights seemed to warm and soften. This is impossible, Dr. Camden whispered, staring at the sudden improvement in all 3 children's vital signs. Impossible is just another word for beyond current understanding, Lilia replied. Dr. Camden, these children need to be moved. Now, before the spiritual protection I can provide here is overwhelmed by the legal machinery Mr. Hartford is putting in motion. I can't authorize. You can authorize anything you believe is in the children's best medical interest, Donovan said, his businessman's instincts finally serving his family instead of his empire. And right now, their vital signs are improving under this woman's care more than they have under any medical treatment. Dr. Camden looked at the monitors, clearly struggling between her medical training and what she was witnessing. The improvement is significant, but removing them from life support will give them a chance at life instead of a comfortable death, Lilia finished. Hartford was frantically texting on his phone, probably calling in favors from judges and politicians who owed him money. You have minutes before this hospital is flooded with court orders that will make it a federal crime to move these children. Then we move now, Donovan said. But Catherine stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. Don, please. I know I betrayed you. I know I chose money over family. But don't let our children die because of my mistakes. I'm not letting them die, he said quietly. I'm giving them the only chance they have to live. By trusting a woman who admitted she lied to you from the beginning. Donovan looked at Lilia, who was already moving toward Mason's bed, her hands working to disconnect him from the machines with practiced efficiency. By trusting a woman who's offering to sacrifice her life for children who aren't hers. By trusting someone who sees love as more powerful than money. Mr. Harlow, one of Hartford's lawyers, stepped forward. If you remove those children from this hospital, you'll be charged with kidnapping and child endangerment. Your parental rights will be permanently terminated. My parental rights? Donovan almost laughed. I haven't been a parent since they were born. I've been a problem solver, a crisis manager, a businessman trying to purchase solutions for issues that can't be bought. This is the first time I'm actually choosing to be their father. He moved to help Lilia with the medical equipment, his hands shaking but his resolve absolute. What do I need to do? The ritual requires both parents, she said quietly. The bloodline debt can only be transferred if both the father and mother consent to release it. They both looked at Catherine, who stood frozen in the middle of the ICU, caught between Hartford's promises of wealth and safety, and her children's actual need for salvation. "Kat," Donovan said gently, "I know you're scared. I know trusting this feels impossible. But look at them." Catherine looked at her children, Mason, breathing more easily as Lilia held him, Liam and Sophia, their color improving even as the machines were disconnected. If she's wrong, we lose them. But if Hartford's right, we lose them anyway, and their deaths serve another family's greed for another century. Donovan extended his hand toward his wife. "Help me save our children." Catherine stared at his outstretched hand. Behind her, Hartford was promising wealth, security, and freedom from consequences. In front of her, Donovan offered uncertainty, sacrifice, and the possibility of redemption. The choice should have been impossible. But looking at her children, seeing them respond to Lilia's touch in ways they'd never responded to medical treatment, Catherine made the decision that would define the rest of her life. She took Donovan's hand. "What do we need to do?" Hartford's face twisted with rage. "You're making the biggest mistake of your lives. I'll destroy you both. I'll ensure you're prosecuted to the full extent." "Mr. Hartford," Lilia said, turning toward him with Mason sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Your threats only have power if we survive long enough to face consequences. Right now, we have about 3 hours before dawn, and about 30 minutes before your legal machinery makes this hospital impossible to leave." She looked directly at Donovan and Catherine. "The choice is simple. Trust me with your children's lives, or watch them die while lawyers argue about custody rights." Donovan felt the weight of the decision settling on him like a mantle. Everything he'd built, everything he'd achieved, everything he'd believed about how the world worked was crumbling around him. But holding his wife's hand, watching his son sleep peacefully for the first time in his life, he realized he was finally making a choice based on love instead of control. "We trust you," he said. And in that moment, standing in a hospital room surrounded by enemies and false friends, Donovan Harlow stopped being a billionaire CEO and became what he should have been from the beginning, a father willing to sacrifice everything for his children's freedom. The war was far from over. But for the first time since it began, he was fighting for the right reasons, with the right allies, for stakes that actually mattered. Now they just had to survive long enough to win it. The helicopter ride to the original Hartford Harlow estate took 43 minutes. Donovan had called in the last favor he could claim. His pilot owed him for a gambling debt that would have destroyed his marriage. No questions asked, no flight plans filed. Just 3 dying children and their parents racing against dawn to reach a place that had been abandoned for over a century. Lilia sat in the back, holding all 3 children with an ease that defied physics. Somehow, in her arms, Mason, Liam, and Sophia seemed not just stable, but peaceful. Their breathing was steady, their color healthy, as if proximity to her was keeping them anchored to life. "There," she said, pointing to a clearing in the dense Ohio woodland below. The original site, where both families made their deal. As they descended, Donovan could see the ruins of what had once been a grand estate. Crumbling foundations, overgrown gardens, and at the center, a stone circle that looked far older than anything the Harlow or Hartford families could have built. "That's not from 1897, Catherine said, staring at the ancient stones. "No," Lilia replied. "The land was already powerful. Your ancestors just repurposed existing energy for their own ends." They landed in the clearing as the first hints of dawn touched the eastern horizon. Time was running out, but as they prepared to disembark, Donovan's phone rang. "Chloe, Mr. Harlow, thank God. You need to know, Melissa is gone." "Gone? What do you mean gone?" "She's not in her crib. She's not in the house. But sir, there are no signs of forced entry, no indication anyone took her. She just disappeared." Donovan felt ice in his veins. How does a catatonic infant disappear? Lilia's face had gone pale. Because she was never catatonic. She was guarding something. And now that we're here, at the source, she's coming home. "What are you talking about?" But before Lilia could answer, a sound echoed across the clearing that made everyone freeze. Baby laughter. High, joyous, completely impossible laughter coming from the direction of the stone circle. They moved toward the sound, Lilia still carrying the 3 children, Donovan and Catherine flanking her like guards. What they found at the center of the circle defied every assumption Donovan had made about the nature of his family's crisis. Melissa sat in the exact center of the stone formation, completely alert, completely healthy, playing with toys that hadn't existed moments before. Around her, the air shimmered with something that wasn't quite light, wasn't quite heat, but felt unmistakably alive. Melissa, Catherine whispered. Their daughter looked up at them and smiled. The first time she'd ever truly focused on their faces, the first time she'd ever seemed to recognize them as her parents. She's been waiting, Lilia said softly, holding the space, keeping the gateway open. Gateway to what? To the truth about what your ancestors really did. The air around them began to shift, and suddenly they weren't alone in the clearing. Figures materialized from the morning mist, translucent but unmistakably present. Children, dozens of them, ranging in age from infants to teenagers, all wearing clothes from different historical periods. The children who were sold, Lilia said, her voice thick with emotion. The ones who died in work camps, in factories, in conditions that no human being should endure. They've been trapped here for over a century, unable to rest because the debt was never truly paid. Donovan stared at the ghostly children, recognizing features that echoed in his own face, in his children's faces. They are family. Distant cousins, mostly. Children from bloodlines connected to yours and Hartford's. Children whose lives were traded for wealth and power. One of the figures stepped forward, a girl who couldn't have been more than 12, wearing a simple dress from the 1890s. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of decades. Thomas Harlow and Edmund Hartford made a bargain, she said. Not with demons or devils, but with desperation itself. They sold children from their own extended families to labor camps, claiming the children had died of disease. The wealth they built was literally purchased with our lives. But why are you still here? Catherine asked. Why haven't you moved on? Because the debt was structured to compound across generations. Every family that profited from our suffering, every business built on our deaths, created spiritual interest that had to be paid. Your children were born carrying the weight of over a century of accumulated injustice. Lilia set Mason, Liam, and Sophia gently on the ground within the stone circle. Immediately, they began to stir, their eyes opening for the first time in hours. But instead of crying, they seemed fascinated by the ghostly children around them, reaching out tiny hands as if trying to touch something just beyond the physical world. The burden transfer ritual, Donovan said, understanding beginning to dawn. It's not about you taking on our family's debt. It's about finally paying what was actually owed. More than that, Lilia replied. It's about transformation. About turning a debt built on exploitation into a legacy built on justice. She pulled the leather journal from her bag, opening it to pages covered in handwriting from multiple generations. My great-great-grandmother wasn't just a midwife who tried to save exploited children. She was Thomas Harlow's daughter. The child he claimed died of scarlet fever, but actually sold into domestic slavery in Jamaica. The revelation hit Donovan like a physical blow. Your cousin. Distant, but real. My family has been working for over a century to break the cycle that yours created. Not for revenge, but for healing. For all of us. Catherine was staring at the ghostly children surrounding her own babies. What does the ritual actually involve? Truth, said the young girl who'd spoken first. Complete acknowledgement of what was done. Public revelation of how these fortunes were really built. And restitution. What kind of restitution? Lilia's expression was solemn. Every penny of wealth that can be traced to the original exploitation. Donated to organizations that fight human trafficking, that support exploited children, that work to prevent what happened to us from happening to others. Donovan felt his breath catch. You're talking about giving away everything. The entire fortune. I'm talking about transforming blood money into healing money. About breaking a cycle of exploitation that's lasted 6 generations. But the companies, the employees, the people whose livelihoods depend, will be better off working for organizations that create value instead of perpetuating harm, the ghostly girl interrupted. The wealth was always poisoned, Donovan Harlow. Your children's suffering is just the latest symptom of a disease that infected your family line the moment your ancestor decided that other people's children were acceptable sacrifices for his ambition. Dawn was breaking across the clearing, painting everything in shades of gold and possibility. Melissa crawled toward her siblings, and as she touched each of them, something extraordinary happened. The other children, Mason, Liam, and Sophia, began to truly wake up. Not just opening their eyes, but becoming present in a way they'd never been before. Mason looked directly at Donovan and smiled. A real smile, full of recognition and what could only be called love. They are free, Lilia whispered. The debt is lifting. But as the ghostly children began to fade, returning to whatever rest they'd been denied for over a century, The young girl fixed Donovan with a look that carried both forgiveness and warning. "The choice is still yours," she said. "You can walk away from this clearing and return to your old life. Use what you've learned to manage the symptoms instead of curing the disease. Keep some of the wealth, make some token donations, and convince yourself you've done enough. And if I do, your children will live. But they'll live carrying the weight of your choice. And their children, and their children's children, will eventually face the same crisis you've faced. The debt never disappears, it just gets passed down until someone chooses to pay it completely." Donovan looked at his wife, at his 4 children who were healthy and present for the first time in their lives, at Lilia who'd risked everything to give his family this chance at redemption. "Oh," he asked, "or you choose transformation. You acknowledge the truth publicly. You use your platform, your influence, your connections to fight the same kind of exploitation that built your wealth. You become the man your children need you to be instead of the man your ancestors trained you to become." The ghostly children were almost gone now, fading into the morning light like mist before the sun. But their presence had changed something fundamental in the clearing, in the stone circle, in the very air around Donovan's family. "There's something else," Lilia said quietly. "Something I haven't told you about the true cost of breaking this cycle." Donovan felt dread settle in his stomach. "What?" "The person who acknowledges the debt, who commits to the restitution, who chooses transformation over comfort." She paused, looking at him with love and terrible sadness. "They become responsible for ensuring it never happens again. Not just in their own family, but anywhere they have the power to prevent it. You're talking about a lifetime commitment. I'm talking about becoming the person you were always supposed to be. The person your children need you to be. The person who can love openly instead of controlling fearfully." As the last of the ghostly children faded away, Donovan felt something shift inside his chest. The constant anxiety that had plagued him since his children's birth was gone. The desperate need to control every variable, to solve every problem with money and power, had simply lifted. For the first time in his adult life, he felt truly free. "I know what I need to do," he said. And in that moment, surrounded by his awakening children and the woman who'd sacrificed everything to give his family a chance at redemption, Donovan Harlow made the choice that would define not just his future, but the legacy he'd leave for generations to come. The choice to love instead of control, to heal instead of exploit, to become the father his children deserved instead of the man his ancestors had trained him to be. The debt was finally ready to be paid in full. 6 months later, Donovan Harlow stood in the same home office where his nightmare had begun, but everything had changed. The mahogany desk was still there, but instead of corporate documents, it was covered with adoption papers, charitable foundation bylaws, and letters from trafficking survivors around the world. From upstairs came a sound that would have been impossible to imagine during those dark months: his children laughing. Real, joyous laughter as Lilia read them a story before their afternoon nap. They slept now, peacefully, naturally, without medication or struggle. They woke up curious about the world instead of screaming at it. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Harlow Foundation donates final $2.8 billion to anti-trafficking organizations. Former CEO, some wealth isn't worth keeping. The transformation hadn't been easy. The public revelation of his family's history had destroyed his social standing overnight. Former friends crossed the street to avoid him. Business associates who'd courted his favor for years suddenly found him toxic to their reputations. The financial restitution had left him with enough money to live comfortably but not lavishly, a middle-class existence that reminded him daily of the life his mother had built through honest work and genuine love. But for the first time since childhood, Donovan felt proud of the man he saw in the mirror. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Catherine stood in the doorway, looking healthier than she had in years. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago, but she'd chosen to remain involved in the children's lives in ways that surprised everyone. "The custody hearing went well," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Judge Carlton agreed to the shared arrangement. The children will spend weekdays here with you and Lilia, weekends with me. How are you feeling about that?" Catherine smiled, a real smile, not the perfect social expression she'd worn throughout their marriage. Relieved. Grateful. Like I finally get to be their mother instead of their manager. The divorce settlement had been unlike anything their lawyers had ever handled. Catherine had chosen to keep only enough money to ensure she could provide stable housing and support for the children. The rest went to the foundation, making her an active partner in the restitution rather than a victim of it. "Richard Hartford's trial starts next week," she continued. The prosecutors think they have enough evidence to prove fraud, conspiracy, and violation of child welfare laws. Apparently, our case opened an investigation into several other families with similar arrangements. Donovan nodded. Hartford's downfall had been swift and complete once the truth emerged. Turns out, he'd been managing debt cycles for multiple bloodlines, keeping children medicated and families compliant to protect his own inherited wealth. The federal investigation had uncovered a network of corruption that stretched back generations. Any word on the other families? The ones whose children were affected. 7 families so far have come forward. Their children are all showing the same improvements yours did once they stopped the medical interventions and addressed the underlying spiritual debt. Catherine paused. Lilia's been invited to testify before Congress about traditional healing practices that modern medicine doesn't recognize. From upstairs came the sound of footsteps, and Lilia appeared in the doorway with Melissa in her arms. Their youngest daughter immediately reached for Donovan, babbling happily in the way that had become her favorite method of demanding his attention. Congress can wait, Lilia said, kissing Donovan softly before settling into the chair beside Catherine. I have more important work here. The relationship between the 3 adults had evolved into something unprecedented. Catherine and Lilia had become genuine friends, bonded by their shared commitment to the children's welfare and their mutual recognition that traditional family structures sometimes needed to be reimagined. There was no jealousy, no competition, just 3 people who'd learned to put children's needs above their own egos. Speaking of important work, Catherine said, pulling out a tablet, the Survivor Support Network wants to offer you the executive director position. Full salary, benefits, and the chance to turn your business skills towards something that actually saves lives. Donovan studied the offer. After losing his corporate empire, he'd spent months wondering if his skills had any value beyond generating profit. The foundation work had shown him that everything he'd learned about organization, strategy, and resource management could serve justice instead of exploitation. What about the travel requirements? He asked. The children need stability. The children need a father who's proud of his work, Lilia said gently. And they need to see that redemption requires action, not just good intentions. She was right, of course. The debt hadn't been erased by a single ritual in an ancient stone circle. It was being paid daily through choices to value people over profit, healing over control, justice over comfort. Melissa squirmed in Lilia's arms, reaching for the window where her brothers and sister were visible in the backyard. Mason was building something elaborate with blocks while Liam and Sophia helped with the kind of focused cooperation that would have been impossible during their months of constant distress. They are so different now, Catherine observed. Like they are finally themselves instead of carrying something too heavy for them to handle. Children aren't meant to pay for their ancestors' mistakes, Lilia said. But they are also not meant to be shielded from the truth about how the world works. They'll grow up knowing that their comfort came at a cost, and that they have a responsibility to ensure other children don't pay similar prices. Donovan's phone buzzed with another news alert. Harlow case inspires federal investigation into generational wealth trauma. Experts call for new approach to family-based mental health issues. The ripple effects continued to spread. Medical schools were adding courses on traditional healing practices. Child welfare organizations were implementing screening protocols for children from old money families. What had started as one family's private crisis had become a catalyst for systemic change. There's something else, Catherine said, her expression shifting to something more serious. The genealogy research Lilia commissioned. It found 37 other bloodlines connected to the original Hartford-Harlow contracts. Families across the country whose children might be carrying similar burdens. Donovan felt the weight of expanded responsibility settling on his shoulders. You're talking about a lifetime of work. I'm talking about a lifetime of meaning, Lilia replied. About using your platform and resources to prevent what happened to our children from happening to others. Their children. Somehow, in the months since the crisis, the 4 babies had become genuinely theirs, not in the legal sense, but in the deeper recognition that family could be built through choice and commitment rather than just biology and law. The Foundation has enough funding to support research and intervention for at least a decade, Catherine added. And the Survivor Support Network position comes with a congressional liaison role. You'd basically be creating federal policy around issues you understand better than anyone in government. It was exactly the kind of impossible challenge that would have excited him in his corporate days, but for entirely different reasons now. Instead of building an empire, he'd be dismantling systems of exploitation. Instead of accumulating power, he'd be distributing justice. "What do you think?" he asked Lilia. She studied his face with the same perceptive intensity she'd shown from the beginning. "I think you already know what you want to do. The question is whether you're ready to trust that wanting to help people is enough motivation to sustain you through the difficult work ahead." From outside came the sound of children's laughter again, but this time it was joined by adult voices. Dr. Camden and her family had come for their weekly visit, part of a friendship that had developed after she'd witnessed the children's miraculous recovery. Chloe had also stayed on, though in a different capacity, as head of household security, protecting the family's privacy while they adjusted to their transformed circumstances. "You know what the strangest part is?" Donovan said, looking around the office that had once been the center of his corporate empire. "I'm happier now than I ever was when I had billions of dollars. The work is harder, the resources are limited, and the problems are more complex. But every day, I know that what I'm doing matters." "That's not strange," Lilia said, shifting Melissa to her hip. "That's what happens when you stop trying to control outcomes and start focusing on creating value for other people." "Speaking of creating value," Catherine said, grinning, "the children's sleep specialist wants to write a case study about traditional healing integration. Apparently, Mason, Liam, Sophia, and Melissa are the first documented cases of complete recovery from generational sleep disorder, which is what they are calling it now." Donovan almost laughed. Leave it to the medical establishment to create a diagnostic category for spiritual debt. But if it helped other families get the support they needed, he'd take progress in whatever form it came. As afternoon faded toward evening, the three adults moved outside to join the children in the backyard. The property was smaller now, more manageable, but it felt more like home than the mansion ever had. There was a vegetable garden where Lilia grew healing herbs, a playground where the children could explore safely, and space for the quiet conversations that had replaced the frantic crisis management of their earlier life. "Daddy," Mason called out, running toward him with the blocks he'd been building. "Look, I made a house where everybody can live together." Donovan knelt down to examine his son's creation. It was intricate and thoughtful, with multiple wings connected by bridges, rooms of different sizes, and what looked like a central gathering space. "Tell me about it," he said. "This part is for you and Mama Lilia." Mason pointed to one wing. "And this part is for Mama Catherine when she visits. And this is where me and Liam and Sophia and Melissa sleep. But see." He pointed to the central space. "This is where we all eat dinner together, because families are supposed to share food." The simple wisdom of a 3-year-old hit Donovan like a revelation. Family wasn't about blood or law or traditional structures. It was about sharing what mattered most: time, attention, food, love. "I think that's a perfect house," he said, pulling Mason into a hug that felt like coming home. As the sun set over their transformed life, Donovan realized that the crying that had started this journey had been more than just infant distress. It had been a call to awakening, a demand that he stop trying to purchase solutions and start creating them. His children slept peacefully now because they lived in a house built on truth instead of lies, love instead of control, justice instead of exploitation. The cost had been everything he'd thought he wanted. The reward was everything he'd actually needed. Lilia slipped her hand into his as they watched their children play in the golden evening light. "Any regrets?" she asked quietly. Donovan thought about his corporate empire, his social standing, his old life of luxury and power. Then he looked at his healthy children, his transformed relationships, his work that actually mattered. "None," he said. "For the first time in my life, none at all." Later that night, after the children were asleep, easily, naturally, peacefully, Donovan stood once again in the office where this journey had begun. But instead of staring out at grounds he owned, he was looking at photographs sent by families around the country whose children were beginning their own healing journeys. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: congressional testimonies, foundation board meetings, site visits to survivor support organizations. It would be difficult work, complex work that required every skill he'd developed during his corporate years but in service of values he'd only recently learned to prioritize. But tonight, for the first time since his children's birth, Donovan Harlow fell asleep to the sound of silence. Not the desperate quiet of exhaustion, but the peaceful silence of a house where everyone was exactly where they belonged. The Billionaire's quadruplets slept peacefully at last. And in learning to heal his children, their father had finally learned to heal himself. The work of breaking generational cycles of harm would continue for the rest of his life. But it was work he chose from love rather than desperation, work that connected him to something larger than his own family's welfare. Some debts, he'd learned, could only be paid through transformation. And some transformations were worth more than all the wealth in the world. What did this story teach you about the difference between controlling outcomes and creating value for others? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see the world.